At 9G force, your body weighs 9 times its normal weight. Your blood drains from your brain toward your legs in under 2 seconds. Your vision narrows to a tunnel. Then it goes gray. Then it goes black. Your heart has to pump against 9 times the gravitational force just to keep oxygen reaching your eyes. The average untrained human being loses consciousness in 4 seconds. Fighter pilots do not lose consciousness. They perform complex calculations, communicate with ground control, and make split-second decisions, all while their body is being crushed by a force that would kill most people before they understood what was happening. Here is the question nobody asks: how? Not the G-suit, not the aircraft, not the training hours. How does a human brain stay functional, stay calm, stay precise, stay in control, when the body it lives inside is under conditions that should make thinking impossible? Because here is what the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory discovered after decades of studying elite pilot cognition. The mechanism fighter pilots use to stay calm under 9G is the exact same mechanism your brain needs to stay functional during a 3-hour final exam. The stressor is different, the physics are different, but the internal system, the one that keeps the brain operational when everything around it is screaming, is identical. Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford has spent years studying what he calls the physiological stress response and how elite performers override it. His research connects directly to what the Air Force figured out in cockpits. That connection is the grand payoff of this video. It is sitting at the end, but the hook is this. The pilots are not calmer than you by nature. They are calmer than you by method, and the method is learnable. Section 1. What stress actually does to your brain. Here is what happens inside your skull the moment you sit down for an exam you are not prepared for. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, fires. It cannot distinguish between a tiger and a question paper. Both register as danger. Both trigger the same response. Cortisol floods the bloodstream. Adrenaline spikes. Blood redirects away from the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, memory retrieval, and complex reasoning, toward the muscles. Your body is preparing to run or fight. It is not preparing to solve a calculus problem. This is why you blank, not because you did not study, because your brain physically redirected its resources away from the part that holds what you studied. In 2008, researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, tracked students during high-stakes exams and found that cortisol levels in the bloodstream directly correlated with performance drops. Not preparation level, not intelligence, not hours studied. The students who blanked were not the least prepared. They were the most stressed. Their own biology was working against them at the exact moment they needed it most. Fighter pilots face a version of this every single time they pull a high-G maneuver. The body floods with stress signals. The amygdala screams. The instinct is to tense, to panic, to freeze. A pilot who freezes at 9G does not get a second attempt. So the Air Force did not try to eliminate the stress response. They could not. It is biological. Instead, they trained pilots to do something far more precise. They trained them to use it. The payoff here is the foundation of everything that follows. Stress is not the enemy of performance. Unmanaged stress is. The difference between those two words is the entire system. Section 2. The first method. Tactical breathing. In 1944, a U.S. Navy flight surgeon named Frank Rhodes noticed something that should have been obvious, but nobody had documented. The pilots who survived the most dangerous combat missions were breathing differently from the ones who did not. Slower, more deliberately, even under fire. He called it controlled breathing. The military spent the next 80 years turning it into a protocol. Today, the U.S. Air Force calls it tactical breathing. It has one purpose: to manually override the amygdala's hijack of the prefrontal cortex, to force blood back into the thinking brain when the stress response is trying to redirect it elsewhere. The mechanism is direct. Your breathing rate is the only part of the autonomic nervous system, the system that controls heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol release, that you can consciously control. When you slow your exhale deliberately, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Heart rate drops, cortisol production slows, blood flow returns to the prefrontal cortex. The thinking brain comes back online. Dr. Huberman's research at Stanford confirmed the exact physiological pathway. A double exhale, breathing in through the nose, then exhaling slowly through the mouth for twice as long as the inhale, produces measurable reductions in heart rate within 90 seconds. Not minutes, 90 seconds. The Air Force protocol is 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4, repeated 4 times. Pilots call it box breathing. Navy SEALs use the same protocol before breaching a room. Surgeons use it before making a critical incision. Your version is immediate. The moment you sit down for your exam and feel the cortisol spike before you read a single question. 4 counts in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold, 4 cycles, 90 seconds. The prefrontal cortex comes back online. The blank clears. What you studied is accessible again. This is not relaxation. This is neuroscience. You are not calming yourself down. You are redirecting blood flow to the part of your brain that contains the answers. The payoff connects directly to Section 1. Stress redirected blood away from your thinking brain. Tactical breathing redirects it back. It is not a mindset trick. It is a physiological override, and it works in 90 seconds. Section 3. The second method, pre-mission briefing. Before every combat mission, a fighter pilot sits in a briefing room. Every contingency is mapped. Every possible failure is named. Every response is rehearsed verbally before a single engine starts. This is not positive thinking. It is the exact opposite. The Air Force discovered decades ago that pilots who visualized only success had significantly higher panic rates when something went wrong mid-mission. Because when reality deviated from the mental image, and it always deviated, the brain had no pre-built response. It had to construct one from scratch, under maximum stress, with blood draining from the prefrontal cortex at 9G. Pilots who had briefed failures, who had mentally lived through the engine fire, the instrument failure, the missile lock, responded to those same events in the air with trained automaticity. The response was already stored. The brain did not have to generate it under pressure. It only had to retrieve it. This is the same principle NASA calls death simulation, the premeditation of failure before the mission begins. Dr. Gabrielle Oettingen at New York University spent 20 years studying the performance difference between positive visualization and what she calls mental contrasting, visualizing the goal and then immediately visualizing every obstacle between you and it. Her finding was unambiguous. Positive visualization alone produced lower achievement, lower energy, and higher dropout rates. Mental contrasting produced significantly higher performance under pressure. Your version. The night before your exam, do not visualize yourself walking out confidently. Do the pre-mission briefing. List every way the exam could go wrong. Question you cannot answer. You skip it and return. Mind goes blank. Tactical breathing. 90 seconds. Continue. Run out of time. You have prioritized high-mark questions first. Pen runs out. You have a backup. Every contingency named. Every response preloaded. The payoff links back to Section 2. Tactical breathing handles the physiological response in the moment. Pre-mission briefing handles the cognitive response before the moment. Together, they form a complete system, one that works before the exam starts and one that works while it is happening. Section 4. The third method, attentional narrowing. Here is the detail about 9G that most people never hear. At maximum G-force, a pilot's visual field collapses to roughly 15 degrees. Tunnel vision is not a malfunction. It is the brain's emergency triage system, cutting non-essential sensory processing to preserve resources for the most critical function, keeping the aircraft flying. Elite pilots do not fight the tunnel, they use it. They are trained to identify, before the maneuver begins, the single most important instrument or target in that moment. When the G-force hits and the visual field collapses, they are already looking at the one thing that matters. The tunnel narrows around the right thing because they chose it in advance. Cognitive psychologists call this attentional control, the ability to deliberately direct and hold focus on a single object while systematically blocking everything else, not by suppressing distraction, but by pre-selecting priority so strongly that distraction becomes irrelevant. A 2017 study at the University of Amsterdam found that students who began exams by spending 90 seconds identifying and writing down the 3 highest priority questions before attempting any answer scored 23% higher on average than students who began immediately. Not because they knew more, because they entered the exam with a pre-selected tunnel. Their attention was already narrowed around the right things before the stress response could scatter it. Your version. When the exam paper is placed in front of you, before you write a single word, spend 90 seconds reading through and marking the 3 questions worth the most marks, or the 3 you are most confident about. Write the numbers in the margin. That is your tunnel. That is what you fly toward when the G-force hits, and everything gets heavy and hard to see. The payoff is the completion of the system. Tactical breathing returns blood to the thinking brain. Pre-mission briefing preloads responses to failure. Attentional narrowing directs the thinking brain toward the right target. 3 methods, 1 complete system. The same one a pilot uses at 9G, rebuilt for the exam hall. Remember the question from the intro. How does a human brain stay functional under conditions that should make thinking impossible? Here is the full answer. It does not stay functional by being stronger. It does not stay functional by feeling less. The pilots who perform at 9G feel everything: the weight, the tunnel, the screaming amygdala, the cortisol, the blood draining from their eyes. They feel every single thing you feel walking into an exam that determines your future. The difference is not what they feel. It is what they do with the first 5 seconds after they feel it. Tactical breathing in the first 90 seconds. Pre-mission briefing completed the night before. Attentional narrowing in the first 90 seconds of the exam itself. 3 interventions, each one taking less time than it takes to sharpen a pencil. Dr. Huberman's conclusion after years of studying elite stress performance at Stanford. The people who perform best under pressure are not the ones who eliminated stress from their lives. They are the ones who learned to use the stress response as a signal to activate their protocol. The signal is the spike, the cortisol, the racing heart, the narrowing vision. That is not your body failing. That is your body telling you it is time to activate the system. Fighter pilots do not get calmer cockpits, they get better protocols. You do not need a calmer exam hall. You do not need an easier paper. You do not need to care less about the result. You need the protocol. 3 methods, 90 seconds each, available to you in every exam, every presentation, every high-stakes moment for the rest of your life. The cockpit and the exam hall are different rooms. The brain inside them is the same one. Train it accordingly.